Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining me here in my kitchen. It's time to make tamales. Now, before you go, oh, I don't know, it seems like a huge endeavor. Number one, I'm going to talk through all of the important parts to just make it something that is within your ability to do. And number two, I'm going to make a small amount, so you don't have to think you're going to commit to making 5 or 6 dozen tamales, because that's the way most tamal recipes are written. But you have to have a few things, and we're going to start with the steamer, because the steamer is absolutely essential. These are steamed little packets. Then that's what makes them so special, because everybody just unrolls them. Now, most people think about tamales for Christmas time, because if you're going to have one of the posada Christmas parties in Mexico, typically there's 3 things that you have to make it work. One is tamales, and number 2 is ponche that you're going to serve to everyone, and then the third thing is a piñata for the kids to break. So everybody outside of Mexico thinks tamales are only for Christmas time. And yes, they are a special thing, but in Mexico they have tamales all the time, even restaurants that specialize in nothing but tamales 365 days a year. So let's talk through each of the ingredients and equipment that we have to start with. So because these are steamed, let's start with the steamer first, okay? So I've put all of these different steamers out here for you because some of them will work and some of them won't work. Let's do the ones that won't work first, okay? So this is a little steamer that I use a lot, and it is a steamer basket that's like that. Very simple. Maybe you have one of those collapsible steamers that you would put down in a pot like that. It may or may not work depending on what the depth from the steamer bottom or the collapsible steamer basket and the top is, because you need about 5 inches, and the tamales have to stand up while you're steaming them. This is only about 4 inches, so that won't work. Same thing happens with these Chinese steamers. They only give me about 3.5 inches over here, so that doesn't really work for me. Of course, in the Mexican markets, every Mexican market that I think I've ever been in, there has been a tamal steamer for sale because they're a special kind of thing. I have the big one that's the normal size that people would have if you're going to make your 5 or 6 dozen tamales. But then I found this small one, which I just love, but I haven't seen it since. But it's just a small tamal steamer, and you can see that there's a great depth here. You put the water in the bottom, this piece comes out so that you just fill it with water down there, and then you put your steamer shelf in there, and then you've got your beautiful little tamal steamer. But there are other things that you could choose too, besides just your little collapsible steamer in a deep pot, which works absolutely fine. And to tell you the truth, that's what I used for years here in the United States before I bought a tamal steamer in one of the Mexican groceries. If you have an Instant Pot, I will tell you that right now they offer, you can find these online. It's just a steamer basket that fits right back down in there. Now, what I have done is to put the steamer attachment that comes, the sort of steamer shelf that comes with the Instant Pot down in there first. And then you buy this little silicone thing and set it down there. And then you put it on steam, put the top on like that, and then let it steam. We're going to steam for about an hour. That's what tamales take, which you will absolutely love, because it will fill the house with this glorious, glorious fragrance that is only the aroma of steaming tamales. Now, let's go on to ingredients, since we've talked about different kinds of steamers. So first of all, you can't make any kind of tamal without masa. So if you live in a place that has really good tortillerias and you want to do something really special, go to the tortilleria and ask for masa para tamal, or the masa for making tamales. It is more coarsely ground and drier than the masa for making tortillas. Or you can go to a Mexican grocery store and buy this very, very well-known brand of the masa for tamales. And it says right there on the label in big letters that it is for tamal. It is not a white bag, it's a cream colored bag. You will notice the difference right away. And if you don't see it, ask around and say, where's the masa for making tamales? And then you just reconstitute that. I have reconstituted that with for this recipe with 3/4 of a cup of hot tap water, and that's it. Now, what I want you to show you is this is the masa that we get from our tortilleria that makes the masa for us to use in our restaurants for making tortillas or for making tamales. And you see that it will hold together if I just squeeze it. So it really is damp. It's damp enough to do that. And when I'm working with the reconstituted tamal masa, I want it to look sort of like that as well. So I can squeeze that together, but I can also just let it fall apart. So that is our masa part of this. Now, the next thing that we need to talk about is the fat that is used to make tamales. So typically in Mexico, it will be fresh rendered pork fat, or what we call lard here. Now, if lard is not something that you're going to choose for religious purposes or reasons, I completely support that. But if you're one of those people that just came up thinking that somehow lard was a bad ingredient, I'm going to ask you to rethink that, because fresh rendered pork fat that is done at high temperatures tastes like roast pork. It's absolutely delicious stuff. So I'm going to ask you to think about the possibility of using some lard, but where would you get it? So I would say you would have to go to a butcher to get it, or go to a Mexican market, but don't just go for the stuff, the national brands that's in little bricks there. That stuff has very little flavor. It's hydrogenated, so it's not good for you health-wise. You would go back to the meat department, say you have the good stuff, the good lard, the one that you maybe use for making carnitas. They will help you. If you're not going to use the lard, then I want to make sure that you get something that's not hydrogenated. You know, there's national brands that are out there. This is the one that I would use because this is made from all palm kernel oil, and it is solid at room temperature. So it will be just like any of the other vegetable shortenings that you would be used to working with. But today, what I'm going to do is to work with the masa that we get from the tortilleria. So the tamal masa from them, and I'm going to use the fresh rendered pork lard. Yes, I'm a lucky guy because we have a pig farmer that gets does all of the pork that we use in our restaurant, and he renders this beautiful, beautiful lard. In most Mexican households, they do a lot of the beating of the tamales dough or batter by hand. I'm not going to recommend that you do that because it takes a lot of time. So I'm going to use just a stand mixer here, and I'm going to put the fat in here. And don't worry, if all of this is just too much information for you, we've got you covered in the recipe that is going to be attached to this video. So I put and I'm not going to tell you the proportions because you'll need to go look those up anyway. I'm going to put the lard in here, and then I'm going to start the beating. I want it to lighten in color. And while it is lightening in color, and this, by the way, is not cold and it's not warm. It's just at room temperature, making it the most pliable that it could be. I'm going to add a teaspoon of baking powder to this and a teaspoon of salt. And now I'm looking at it, and it's already lightened a lot in color, which means that literally it is getting air pumped into it, which is what we're looking for. If it's very hot in your kitchen when you're doing this, you'll want to put the fat that you're using for a brief time in the refrigerator to cool it down a little bit so that you can actually beat some air into it. Now, on a slow speed here, I'm going to add this masa in 3 additions. So there went about 1/3 of it. Make sure it's well mixed in. Another 1/3 of it. Beat that. And then our last third of the masa goes in, and that's a really, really stiff looking mixture now. So we're going to soften it up with a little bit of chicken broth. If you're doing these and you want to make them all vegetarian, I'm going to make a chicken filling, but you could do a vegetable filling. We could do this all vegetarian, and in our restaurant we do a bunch of them vegetarian. I would use this shortening, and I would use vegetable stock for it. But now I'm going to put in about a cupful of this broth. But in order for it to sort of get softening up the masa, I'm going to do it slowly here. I'm just going to pour it in a very thin stream as it mixes into the masa. Now I have a cup and a half of broth here because a lot of times you will need that much, but usually for me, it's about a cup that I need. So I'm going to stop before I have used up all of this broth. So you can see it now, it's starting to look like a thick cake batter. And let's see where we are here. I'm right at the cup full. Yeah, I think I'm just going to stop with that because this is the most important thing that I can show you is what the consistency of this batter is supposed to be like. It's sort of like making bread. When you're making bread, sometimes the flour will absorb more liquid or less liquid. So what you're going for in bread making, of course, is the feel of the bread dough. Sort of the same thing happens now with this. And I'm going to turn it off and then open it up so that you can see what the consistency of this is. But look at that. It just looks like a beautiful cake batter. It will fall off of my beater like that. It's light and fluffy. I'm going to put this back on, beat it for just another minute to see if I can get more air in it. And I'm going to show you this sort of classic test for determining whether you've beaten the masa enough. So I'm going to put this back on and beat it a little bit more. Okay, open this up, and I'm going to just take like a half a teaspoon. I'm using a measuring thing for this half a teaspoon, but you don't have to do that at all. Just a small spoon. And I'm going to take about a half a teaspoon of it, and I'm going to put it onto this ice water here. And you'll notice, let me get the ice out of the way there. You'll notice that it just floats. Okay, that means that we have beaten it well, and it's got enough air incorporated in it that it can float. Now there's lots of different kinds of tamales. I'm going to be making a chicken with green salsa on it, steamed in corn husks that are light and fluffy. That's very much a central style tamal. There are so many different kinds of tamales in Mexico. They range all the way from the really fluffy ones that I just described in central Mexico to almost pudding-like ones that are often wrapped in banana leaves. But for today, I'm going central style. I'm going to do the light and fluffy ones in the corn husk because that's what you're going to be able to accomplish really the most easily of any of the tamales that I could show you. In just a second, I will be back ready to make the filling with you. Chicken tamales with a really punchy salsa verde. They're some of my favorites. They're some of the most commonly found in Mexico. And we're going to do what you've seen me do many times, is to roast some tomatillos, garlic, and some green chili. Now you could use any kind of green chili that you have for this. It could be jalapenos, it could be serranos, which is what I'm using here. But if you have some in your garden, something that's green and spicy, you might want to do that. Those of you that are real aficionados of spicy food could make an habanero version of this if you would like to. All of those things would be great. A very classic technique of roasting everything, though we are going to do it under a broiler rather than on the stove top like it would typically be done in Mexico. I've put these all on a rimmed baking sheet. I took the tops, the little stems off of the chilies, and the garlic is still in its papery husk. These will go under my preheated broiler here, really close, about 4 inches below the highest setting that my oven offers. And after about 6 minutes or so, they will be blotchy black. And then I'll flip everything over and we'll roast it for another 6 minutes. Sometimes the chilies need to be pulled before that. Sometimes the garlic does. But we'll take a look at it as we're going along here. So I'm just going to slide these in there and I will meet you back here when they are ready. No, I know this doesn't look very pretty, but this is what's going to be the best flavor. You can see that our chilies are very roasted. They've cooled down now on the sheet here. There's juice that they've exuded as they were roasted, but I'm going to put everything, after I peel this garlic, everything into a food processor. You could use a blender for this. The little papery skin is what really helps the garlic not to burn, and you know that burnt garlic is probably not going to be the most delicious thing. It can get a little bit bitter, but roasted garlic has a lot of sweetness, which is why we actually do this part of it. So I've got my garlics now all peeled here. Everything will go into the food processor together, including all that juice that's on the baking sheet. But I know it's not very pretty, but wait till you taste this. If you've never done this, oh, and by the way, those of you that don't like to scrub the rimmed baking sheet, you can put a piece of foil down and then just get rid of that foil. Everything will have been roasted on the foil and makes for really easy cleanup. If you have a silicone mat, that would work as well. Okay, so that's all in there. Now, I'm going to get rid of all of this so that we can make this basic salsa verde. I'm not going to cook it. I'm not going to turn it into a sauce with any addition of broth or anything, because I want this one to be really punchy so that I don't serve the tamales with a salsa. Now, that's very common in Mexico. Rarely do you see tamales being served with a salsa. So I want this filling to be like salsa and filling all in one. Okay, so I'm going to let that run for just a second. I don't want it to get smooth and pureed like it was like out of a can, something out of a can. I want it to have a little bit of texture still left in there. So that looks like it's going to be about the right amount. I'm going to scrape, because a lot of that goodness went up here on the top of the food processor. I'm going to scrape that down in here as well. And then all of this will go. You'll choose some sort of cooked chicken to be with this. I've got a couple of grilled chicken breasts, which I'm happy to say you can actually buy now in a lot of frozen food counters. So you could do that, some rotisserie chicken, or if you have some chicken breast or chicken thighs that you just want to poach in water until they're done, make sure that the water is salted so that they have some good flavor to them. That's really all you have to do. That is coarsely shredded. When I say coarsely shredded, finely shredded would be to just pull everything apart like that. But this is in what I would call coarse shreds. So I'm going to mix that into the salsa. We're missing just now a little chopped cilantro and some salt to add to it. So in a typical way of chopping cilantro, I will take the bunch of cilantro that I pulled off of here, and it's a pretty good amount here that I'm using because I want that flavor to be present all the way through the steaming of the tamales. So cutting very thin slices crosswise, not taking the leaves off, but chopping the stems in with everything. And then when I run out of leaves down here, I will stop, get rid of the stems there, put that in with the rest of our mixture. Now I know that chicken has had a little bit of salt on it already. So I'm not going to go overboard with the salt on this. I just want to do enough to really season it. So I know what that will take here. And it's probably about that much. So more in that sort of half teaspoon range. And this is what you want your filling to look like. Very simple and straightforward. If you have another salsa that you like, if you had a jarred salsa that you really like, maybe you're going to open that jar and put that with your chicken and work with that. I just want to make sure that making tamales is not that's something that is way off in the distant future, but becomes part of everyday thinking in your kitchen, so that you could say, yeah, I'm going to make some tamales. I'm going to have some people over. I'm going to celebrate a birthday, and I'm going to make some beautiful tamales and take that steamer to the table and just fill the room with that absolutely glorious aroma. Okay, now we're ready to move on to the forming of the tamales. Now, corn husks are available in lots of grocery stores in the United States, depending on what part of the country that you're in. Certainly in Chicago, we find them lots of places and in every Mexican grocery store. This is the variety that we find a lot in our grocery stores here. It's a product of Mexico, and it's a little different than the ones that I see in Mexico. You'll notice that there's a sort of blunt cut here at the end, and the ones in Mexico tend to be more of the base of it that curves in, actually making it a little bit easier to form a tamal in them. Okay, now the first thing that you got to do is to soak these so that they become pliable. That takes a couple of hours. If you wanted to boil water and pour it over, I just use hot tap water and do that. The boiling water might speed it along a few minutes, but you could soak these overnight if you wanted to. But 2 hours is usually a good amount. Now you want to choose a dozen really nice leaves here, big full ones with no tears in them. And oh, look at that one. It's really gorgeous. That's really, really big. It's almost too big. I'm going to tear off a little bit of that one there. And we're going to collect these ones that are they're too small to make tamales out of, and use them in the steamer to have on the bottom. But these are really, really very, very nice ones. If you find some that don't have, they're broken in the middle, you can double them up if that's all you can find. But I often will take the ones that are the smaller pieces and put them down in the bottom of the steamer. Now this is that sort of pasta steamer, asparagus steamer. I've got water in the bottom of it here. And I'm just going to take the corn husks that are not big enough to use for making tamales and lay them kind of like in a sort of star pattern to cover the bottom of the steamer. That will add extra aroma to all of this. Now, I want to dry these guys off a little bit, or we can just do it one at a time as we're working through them, and form tamales with them. So we'll start here by laying a large corn husk, soaked corn husk, in front of me with the cutoff end toward me. The next step is to take about 1/4 cup. I'm going to measure this. Usually you don't see people measuring this because they know they can eye that amount, but 1/4 cup is a standard size tamal. And I'm going to scoop that right into the center of the base of this corn husk here. I want to get all of it out, so I'm going to do that. You can see why using a 1/4 cup measure is a little bit cumbersome after a while. And then take a spoon. You want to leave about 1/2 inch on this end. You'll see why in just a second. And you're going to make about a 4-inch square, if you will. Something that's about like that. So you can see that I'm working toward this flat end here, and I want my 4-inch square to be in the middle. Then I'm going to take a portion of the chicken filling and put that down the center there. I think that will be about the right amount. And using the two sides of the corn husk, I'm going to roll this filling in the masa. So I'm going to completely cover it like that. You can see that. Then pull these two sides together. You can see the outline of the masa in here. And where they meet here, I'm just going to roll it around like that. And then where you see that the masa stops, I'm going to fold that under. And then that is the standard, the most common form for making a tamal. Some of you have probably, so I'm going to stand it up in here. Actually, these are kind of hefty corn husks, so I'm going to pleat it at the bottom, not pleat it, I'm just going to really squeeze it at the bottom to make a tight fold there, and then just put this guy right here on the side standing up. You never want these guys to be lying down, and you can see now why you need a deep steamer to accommodate them. Now, there are probably a lot of you have seen very fancy ties. There are some people that like to make their tamales and then they fold both ends under like that, and they will tie them around. That makes a really small tamal that is tight in there, never as fluffy, I think, as the ones that are steamed standing up with an open end to them. But sometimes people will take little strands of the corn husk, and I will show you this one now as a second version of it. And this is actually, if you're starting out and if you've never done these before, you might want to try this thing. But this is the moment that you could employ the little ties. So you would bring that up like that and go around and make a little knot in it, and that will keep it completely shut. Most of the people that make tamales for a living, they don't do that tie part of it, but this will keep them in really good shape standing up in here. So I've got another 10 or so. This might make 13 or 14 by the time we're done, but I've got all of those to do, and then I will show you what it should look like when we're ready to go to the steaming part of this recipe. You don't want to tie these too tight. Because they are going to expand. Remember, there's baking powder in them. That's one of the reasons that we leave that ½ inch at the top so they can kind of come up and expand. I usually give them just a little tap like that and then fit them down in here. Now, you look at your steamer. If there's any open space, they will have a tendency to slip down, which is not good during the steaming. So I've got a couple of balls of foil, and I'm going to just make sure everything is kind of tight in here, so they're standing up, not tight, but they're standing up nicely, and then fill in the little extra space here with a couple of balls of tin foil that will keep everything in position. Now, I've got my water here. I haven't turned it on, obviously, because I was working with making the tamales here, but a little trick that everybody talks about in Mexico is drop a coin in the bottom of the pot, because you don't want to run out of water, and you can't really see it very easily. So I'm going to put the top on here, and then we're going to bring it to a boil over high heat, and then regulate the temperature so that we see steam puffing continuously out. It doesn't have to be at a raging, roiling boil, but it needs to be a steady steam for this about an hour, and we'll come back and we'll check them after that. That rattling little penny that I put in there is still going, which indicates to me, I mean, I can hear it, and it indicates to me I still have some water. Now, if you don't hear it, that means you're running out of water, and you'll want to take this thing apart a little bit and put some water in there. I always like to put hot water in there so it comes right back to a boil. But with a good inch of water, you should get through most of your hour of steaming. Now is the moment. We are going to uncover this thing and pull one of these beauties out and make sure that it's cooked. Okay, so here's the way that you would determine if it's cooked or not. First of all, of course, I've got to get the tie off. It might be easier for me if I just cut this tie like that. And then we want to make sure that it is not sticking still to the corn husk. So as we unroll it here, see how it just comes apart? So that indicates to me that it is completely finished. These are going to be very tender at this point. Most people will tell you to turn the fire off, let them stand in the steamer for 15 or 20 minutes. They'll still be really, really hot, but the masa itself will sort of start to firm up, and then you'll have a really beautiful, oh man, look at that. I'm going to go, even though it's kind of fall apart tender here, I'm going to, they're so light, so beautiful, so full of flavor. I made that salsa pretty spicy so that all of that flavor comes through there. If you decide to make tamales for the holiday or any other day, I think you're just going to love tackling this recipe.